I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
The big thing is we started to realize we had to respect each other, and to a very deep level. I mean, not just this kind of fuzzy, foofy, oh yeah, I respect you, but I mean, even respecting each other to the level of saying, I respect how you got to your current beliefs. That's hard to do because we disagree, but I'm going to respect the fact, and I do, that she came about her beliefs honestly, and that if she goes to the end of her life believing this, that's fine with me. She's working at doing the same thing for me.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 206 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Dr. Bob Pondillo and I interview Alan Witmer, also known as his alter ego Rex Jamesson on Facebook. Alan is a software designer in Lebanon, New Hampshire. He's been married 34 years, and that's to his second wife, which puts him about Bob's age. He has 2 adult children and 1 3-year-old grandchild. He and his wife enjoy motorcycling together, swing dance, and reading books together. He's an avid runner, a musician, a philosophical naturalist, but not a nihilist. He believes there is awesome purpose and meaning to be found in this life after God. Alan grew up in Pennsylvania Dutch country, surrounded by conservative Christian values. He accepted Christ at age 9. In his mid-20s, he left the church for about 5 years following the tumultuous breakup of his first marriage, but went back to his faith again and stayed the second time for almost 3 decades. He was happy and active in his faith. When he ventured into Christian apologetics, he unwittingly swallowed the red pill. His investigation led him down a path of reason, which, had he known where it would lead, he would never have chosen. Today he is happily out of the faith. Although he discredits fundamentalism as an evil, immoral system that entraps and enslaves people, his own narrow escape from the illusion taught him to respect and love his family and friends who remain, including his Christian wife. Before we get into our talk with Alan, I want to share a little bit about my wife and I going to Barcelona, Spain this last week. Without talking too much about Barcelona, as amazing as it was and is a fantastic city, I want to emphasize the benefit of traveling in general, because the truth is that this planet has countless cool cities and amazing destinations that no one, not even Anthony Bardeau, rest in peace, could see them all in a lifetime. But I want to focus on the word orientation, and especially the value of disorientation. Getting out of our homes, our hometowns, our culture, our routines can be disorienting, and travel pushes us out of our comfort zones and we're forced into disorientation. And this is where the magic happens. When traveling, the way you wake up is different. The expectations of the day are full of unknowns. When you're walking around, you're taking in the scenery with heightened awareness. You are woke to the new surroundings and excited and a bit scared. Thus, you are present, much more present than back home. Orientation has to do with identifying where I am in relation to something immovable. I'm moving around, but I know where I am because I know where I am in relationship to home base or ground zero or headquarters or something stationary, central, and unchanging. How do we orient our north, south, east, and west compass points in relation to the sun, a non-moving object? Directions that are not relative to something else are 100% and absolutely arbitrary. If you ask me to point up, I'm going to orient myself to the ground and point away from it. If, however, I were to travel to the opposite side of the world, the up I was just pointing at would be the down in this new orientation. The same basic principle applies for ideas like the compass points. There is no scientific reason why the Northern Hemisphere is on top or why London is higher than Miami instead of the other way around. In truth, the reason is entirely political. Our current map orientation comes from the European map makers of a few centuries ago. That orientation of the globe is the one that the entire world uses today, but it is no less true or legitimate than to turn the map upside down and find yourself on it. While helpful to our existence and our sense of direction and thus our orientation, these are man-made constructs. Like language, they are just tools and symbols that help us relate to one another and our environments. Which brings us to the second word I want to highlight, relationship. Our orientation is entirely based on where we are in relation to something else. And before you think I'm being critical of these constructs, have you ever been driving down the road with your head tilted 90 degrees to the right or left? Just by changing your orientation a little, you seriously throw off your ability to drive straight, to avoid other cars, to stay in your lane even. We need order, structure, and reliability in our lives just to function. And these constructs save our lives every day. Disorientation may be a good exercise or even fun, but it is not a sustainable way of life. Vacations are cool because they take us out of our comfort zones and because we get to come back to them. I say all this in relation to our talk with Alan because he's extremely graceful towards people that need faith. Faith in God and or the Scriptures and or the weekly community. Give people something with which their relationship orients their lives. Like turning my head sideways while driving scares me and in fact threatens my life, for some people, giving up God scares them and threatens their very lives. I know I've inferred before that people who need faith have stunted their maturity by clinging to it, and I know that that was my experience. But I'm loath to become nothing more than an inverse rendition of judgmental Christians. Alan models this. He says at one point that if his wife were to go her whole life to the grave believing in Christianity, he won't think any less of her. Wow, that's something to think about. If we're going to be yes-sayers to reality, we might do well to disorient ourselves from false stationary standards by which we measure and judge things. To stop measuring people and circumstances against a pre-existing idea of how things should go or how we want people to be, including ourselves. Mentally, emotionally, we can remove measurements like north, south, east, and west in relation to the sun and the presumed map of the world and let ourselves float in space. Let people be what they'll be. Circumstances be what they'll be. And have the presence and heightened awareness of one on vacation, away from home, out of one's comfort zone, disoriented, and ready for the unnormal, the spontaneous, and the unpredictable. We live on a three-dimensional orb, not a one-dimensional plane. There's no pattern to the numerical sequence of pi. We think we understand things. We think we know how people should be or what they should believe. People are free, and we are free to leave them free. This is the beauty of agnosticism, of humility, of saying yes to what is. We taped this conversation on May 20th, 2018.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also, we offer these podcasts for free and without sponsorship, and your support truly makes a difference. You can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge a monthly donation through Patreon. That's patreon.com, and you can search for Everyone's Agnostic Podcast or EA Podcast. Secondly, you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. Just click on the donation button. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. Thank you for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3, the famous mic test.
Yeah.
Musicians can only count to 3, and jazz musicians to 5. That's about it.
Hey, Alan, it's Bob.
Hey, Bob.
The other guy. Yeah.
The other guy. Good to hear from you.
Nice to hear you, too. Are you going by Alan or Rex? What's the best way to...
I'm going to go by Alan, and I had a conversation with my wife yesterday.
Uh-huh.
Do you want me to use a pseudonym? She said, use my name. She said, you're out, I'm out. So.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's going to be good. I don't have to mask anything. So I love that.
Okay, cool. So you're Alan. That's good.
You're in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's right. Lebanon, New Hampshire, where the winter lasts until the first week of June.
Wow. So it's almost over. That's right.
Yeah, we can't plant until after the first week. I ended up planting my garden 3 times one year because I made the mistake of planting in the last week of May. And boy, believe me, you have to trust what the weatherman says or what the agriculturalists say.
I bet.
So what's June and July like there?
Actually, they get really nice. We can have really miserable Memorial Days.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember hanging out. As in cold. Yeah. And I remember hanging around at work picnics sometimes with a heavy jacket on. But
Wow.
June, July, August, early September get gorgeous up here. And we're talking about motorcycle riding in the 80s, kind of gorgeous.
Wow. That's
Well,
great.
and I've read your bio that you are a motorcycle rider.
Yeah, I've got a Victory Vision. The thing is gorgeous. We actually bought it because Kim wanted to ride on the back of it. And, we were doing a lot of 2-up riding. And I made the drastic mistake 4 years ago of saying, hey, why don't you get your license? We bought the Victory so we could do 2-up. And she gets her license and is like, well, now I can't get her on the back of mine anymore.
she goes.
I mean,
Wow.
she is a fiend. She loves the thing, yeah.
Oh, that's
So you
great.
both have one, the same motorcycle?
She has a little Yamaha V-Star 650.
Mm-hmm.
So hers is a lot lower weight. It also sits lower to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just right for her. She has a knee that she's not too happy about, and so it doesn't require her to really push too hard to get it off the kickstand, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, how long you been listening to this podcast?
Oh, probably a year and a half. And I go on binges in the wintertime because I love to run and I can't run out here at all. So I do a lot of running on the treadmill in the wintertime. And I'll do about 2 podcasts a week and kind of start to catch up. And then the summer comes and I'm spending all my time outdoors and I get behind and I catch up again. Yeah. So when I talked to you earlier on a couple weeks ago, I had been listening to an October 2017 podcast. I think you had interviewed Keith B., and then you also interviewed a guy from Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and those were 2 that really got me thinking, oh, I got to get on here and talk.
Yeah, good.
Super. Well, we're happy to have you, man.
It's happening.
Yeah.
So let's get into your religious upbringing. I related to a lot of it, so jump in.
Oh, okay. So I was raised pretty much Lancaster County religious. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what that's all about, it's extremely conservative. We've got Mennonite, we've got Amish, we've got Church of the Brethren there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's a pretty, I would call it non-toxic Christianity. Yeah. That there's not a lot of judgmentalism. Well, I say that as a kid, I didn't notice it. Mm-hmm. I think later on, if you get into the Mennonite and Amish, you do see a lot more of that going on. But the Church of the Brethren, we studied the Bible. I mean, we were intense in the Bible. So I went to a church. It was called Bible Fellowship Church mm-hmm. for a lot of my late grade school and early teen years. Not only the church, but also the way I'm wired just turned me into a complete Bible nerd. I got to tell you, kind of a humorous story. When I was in 6th grade, living in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, my parents had a refrigerator delivered. And, of course, they cut open the bottom of the box. They pull it off the top. And this is a perfect place for a kid. This is like kids love forts and hangouts, right?
Right.
I took this refrigerator box into the backyard, and I had this 5-foot-tall, 2-by-2-foot fort that I studied the Bible in for days. I would just go to the backyard and spend hours in the thing. So, I was a total geek, by the way. This will come as a complete surprise to you since I told you that, but I was not very popular in school.
And really? You're a computer nerd.
I'm a computer nerd now. That's right. But I was a total geek then. I would do ridiculous things like I figured out the square root of 2 to about 200 decimal places, and then I memorized it. and then I was stupid enough to actually repeat it in school. So I was sort of like beat up a lot.
Sort of. Wow.
But the thing is, I was a total fundamentalist. So back then, even when I came back, I'll tell you about this later, but you've read it in my bio. I left the church and then came back, but both times I left and came back as a 6-day creationist, King James, all of that. Yeah. And by the way, that reminds me, you mentioned I'm known as Alan, but my post-faith moniker, if you will, is Rex Jamesson. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of a pun because Rex meaning king.
King James.
So I'm King James' son. Yeah. So it's Rex with 2 S's. Because I want to be King James' son. I mean, because that's who I really was. That was my identity for 40 some years of my life. Yeah. And I got married. I served in an on-the-road music ministry.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 20, and this was in 1977. I was born in 56. My first wife and I, we went on the road with basically a contemporary gospel group. Yep. But it was headed by a handicapped fellow, no arms, and only pretty much a leg and a stump, short leg and a stump. Wow. He's a very handsome guy. He's a very good singer. And his handicap really helped us to be very popular in the East Coast and up through Michigan and that sort of area. But, a year on the road doing gospel music, rubbing shoulders with gospel quartets. Cass, you probably remember a lot of them. I mean, I'm sure you've heard like the Kingsmen and the
Sure.
And, I don't think we ever had a lot of interaction with other groups because this group had a very specific contemporary music niche. But we did meet a lot of people. We had a lot of problems. We had a bus that broke down, and we ended up in the panhandle of Florida for weeks and weeks trying to get the engine fixed. We went through basically all of 78 on the road. And then we left the group. We came back to Leola, Pennsylvania. It was there that my first wife fell away from the faith. And we had a tumultuous marriage anyway. So we were married about 5.5 to 6 years. Basically, when that broke up and when she left the faith, it completely devastated my Calvinist ideas. And I don't know where you were at, Cass, in terms of that.
No, I wasn't much Calvinist. I was pretty much Arminian or free will.
Okay. Well, for me, I mean, if you look at the Bible and you say, God desires that none should perish, and you look at that as, well, that's the P of the Calvinist tulip, right? The perseverance of saints. I could not get over the fact that she walked away from the faith. And it completely shook me to my core. So at the same time, I was starting to go back to college. I met a very learned person who was pretty anti-theist. He was railing about a lot of the church atrocities over the years. Before long, this cognitive dissonance just allowed me to walk away. By the way, I should also say that while I was growing up, I looked at a lot of things as answers to prayer. I think a lot of Christians do.
Yeah.
I would tend to pray like most, I think, in a very non-specific way. If I had a question, I'd pray for an answer. But I would pray rather generally. So I'd pray for an answer to a question or a problem, and then pretty much look for a sign that God had answered. And I think that happens a lot. So there finally came a time where I was sitting in a charismatic church in Hershey, PA, thereabouts, and they were speaking in tongues, they were prophesying, all this God stuff was going on. And I prayed, God, I'm on the verge of not believing anymore. If you're really there, have somebody with a message for me. They don't even have to call me by name, but have somebody with a message for me telling me you're there. And of course, crickets, right? I mean, and I've asked for specific things before and occasionally seen them happen. I look at that now and I can explain why that is. But most of the time, it was general things. Well, this one failed, and I just lost it. I said, God, I actually got angry at God. So when Christians try to characterize atheists as angry or angry at God, I think there is a proportion that is.
I think it's the first stage, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can't just go from believing in God to not believing in God. I mean, it almost always starts with, I believe in God, I love God, and then he's been absent, and so I don't like him.
I couldn't say it better.
It's kind of an immature thing, because you do go, oh, it's not that I like him or dislike him. He doesn't, we're talking about a unicorn here. So,
yeah, but it is definitely so true. And I think I got through a lot of the angry atheist stuff there. So when I finally deconverted for real, decades later, I didn't go through as much of that stage then.
So what you're talking about college, this first time that you gave up?
Yeah, I had originally gone to college right out of high school, 75, 76, and then left to actually get more involved in music and music ministry and to get married. And then I went back in 83 and 84. I graduated in 84. And that's when I went back, got a computer science degree, and actually met my second and current wife.
Yeah.
So it was during that time that I started out as an angry atheist. Oh, I remember. And of course, I also had a chance to live out all the things that I never lived out before. So I got drunk a couple of times. I got high once. I remember getting so drunk once that I woke up and thought I should soak my contacts, and the only thing I had to soak them in was Coca-Cola, so I soaked them in Coca-Cola. Now, fortunately, that was not sustainable. Unfortunately, I didn't try to sustain that. But that was the angry phase, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
But I met my wife then as I was getting over some of that anger. We met in 83. We got married in 84. We got married after a very quick courtship. one of the things is that I had to give her full disclosure of who I was. I was once married. My divorce hadn't come through yet when I started seeing her, and I wanted her to know all this. So we were extremely open in our communication in that relationship. And friends of hers, within 2 weeks after we met, said, "You guys walk through college in lockstep." I mean, we would literally, without even knowing it, we were just so soulmate-ish, if you will, that everything we did was 100% together. So we fell head over heels in love. And I was still an atheist. She was, I guess she would probably call herself a moderate Christian at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we got married in July of '84.
And you're how old?
And at that time?
Yeah.
I was 27.
Okay.
And she was 18. So
whoa.
I have to tell you, I was not her parents' favorite, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, though, this sort of helped cement our relationship. Going back a few months, in December of '83, she and I had been together for 3 months then, but we were head over heels. And she went back home. She told her parents more of the details about me, that I had been married. I actually had a vasectomy with my first marriage.
Oh my.
And I didn't think about it at that time. I have children now, and I realize now, if my daughter at 18 had come home with a 27-year-old guy who had been married and had a vasectomy, I would be livid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My first wife hated children, and I don't mean to put too fine a point of that, but she was quite upfront about that. And the only way to have any kind of relationship with her, even if she was on birth control, she just did not trust to have sex without having completely safe,
Yeah.
Wow.
So we had managed to convince a doctor during that first marriage that we were serious. We did not want kids ever, ever, ever. And that's hard to do, by the way. It's hard for a doctor to accept taking a 20-something-year-old guy and giving the vasectomy, because it's not guaranteed reversible.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
So you take all that stuff together and you whirl that in a pie and you show it to the parents, and the parents say, "You got to break up with him."
Yeah.
And in fact, they insisted I had to be gay. That's the only way I could have gotten that vasectomy. That's the only way a doctor would have done it. And by the way, I've got a great relationship with her parents now, but it took decades to recover from that.
Wow.
How long were you married to your first wife?
About 5.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you had any contact with her over the years?
We did for a while. It's kind of broken off since then, but for the first 10 years or so, we would send each other Christmas cards. And of course, when I had come back to the faith with my new wife, we were just overjoyed because she said something mildly spiritual in one of her cards, and I thought, "Oh, she's coming back to the Lord."
Yeah. So when she deconverted while you were married, was that a part of your? Well, you just said that there was other things going on, but that was hard for you to watch her deconvert.
Absolutely, it was hard. Yeah, because it just blew everything that I believed about God's sovereignty.
Oh yeah, the Calvinism. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about, I mean, the basis that I hung my hat on, if you will, is that, well, God wants nobody to be lost. So at the very least, I believed He would take somebody in death before He would let them fall away. After all, He knows everything, right?
Yeah, another way you could spin it is that she'll be back. I mean, you can't get out of the grasp of God.
Right.
I mean, was it some of that? I know you're quoting that He's not willing that any should perish, but also there's that Hebrew passage, I think, where He says it's impossible to crucify the Son of God all over again. And there's a couple of ways to read that.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
And there's also the unforgivable sin that's very vague, and it's interpreted in about a bazillion ways in Christian churches these days.
Yeah, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm telling you.
Yeah, Bob. It's interesting, and the way I've heard it explained most often is that the person who can't come back. There's a lot of talk about a person who just falls away, who becomes backslidden, who sort of like learns to ignore God for a while.
Mm-hmm. But it just sounds to me like you put yourself in this invisible box, and you just twist and turn, and you try and you look for things, and it's like just to make yourself crazy.
There's definitely a lot of that with dogma. There's definitely that's going on. We have these various ways of trying to explain what's in the Bible. So with the box of a person who can't come back, it's the person who's actually gone to not having any faith anymore. Wow. Now, ironically, I went to that point in the 20s, but I could convince myself later on that maybe I hadn't really lost my faith. I'm at that point now. There's no getting me back now, I would say, according to the Bible.
What do you mean, according to the Bible?
Well, according to the Bible, I am one who has blasphemed the Lord's name or blasphemed the Holy Spirit by saying he does this.
Yeah, I thought you were saying I can't go back because none of us can go back because of we'd have to unlearn everything that we learned through our deconstruction, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm just saying, according to the Bible, I can't come back, according to a common interpretation of it.
Yeah, at one point in your bio, you say, I'm just going to read it, that you had unwittingly swallowed the red pill, and that would be like you were knee-deep in Christianity. And then your investigation led you down a path of reason, which, had you known where it was going to lead, you would never have chosen it.
Really?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So fast forward to the point where we've been serving in churches for decades. I've come back to the faith. And by the way, I was a very happy Christian. I've been a happy person all my life. So I have nothing to complain about the church for. I have no toxic experience. But come the spring of 2015, and I would say I hit the perfect trifecta of things that took me out. And this is where I got to say, up front, first and foremost, I completely respect Christians that I know, because if any of the events that happened in early 2015 had been even slightly different, I probably would still be there today.
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, I'm grateful to be out, by the way. But so basically what happened was I had a coworker. She had a group of runners that she was organizing runs with, and all these runners wanted to do woods runs. She said to me, why don't you take some of us out? You know the trails. So I did. But what ended up happening is, more often than not, a lot of her people would beg off. So it would end up being just her and me. And I found out that she wasn't a believer. She called herself a lapsed Catholic. And I thought, oh, well, this is great. I'll witness to her.
Okay.
Meanwhile, about the same month, we had a real issue in church. One of our members had come out as transsexual. She or they wanted to go by a new name, a boy's name. And remember, I was still extremely dogmatic. I was still fundamentalist. And so was the church. So our pastor, who is a very compassionate guy and a very smart, reasonable guy, I'd say he's probably not just a Christian, he's a humanist.
Yeah.
He basically had a meeting where he had all of us down in the basement, and he tried to talk about how to love this person who, according to our interpretation of the Bible, was, let's face it, she was sinning, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's how we had to look at it. That's how to love this person. And I saw a lot of confusion, a lot of anger, a lot of fear in the faces that day. I know a few in particular who just could not accept that. And I thought, you know what? I got to get a little bit more into apologetics, because what's bothering me here is that real life is conflicting with what we understand of the Bible, and we're not sure how to handle it. Yeah. So I thought, let me get into apologetics. And like I say, the same month, this coworker said, let's run the trail system. We started talking about spirituality. And so I'm going to tell her all about it. And so I start watching apologetics, counter-apologetics videos. I watch William Lane Craig, and I watch Ravi Zacharias and John Lennox. And they're debating hated people such as Richard Dawkins,
Right.
heaven forbid, he's the devil incarnate if you're a Christian, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. He's scary.
Yeah. And I had watched many debates before, and clearly in my mind, the Christian always won. Well, here's what happened in May of 2015. I started watching these debates knowing I was going to have to try to explain them to somebody who didn't believe. So I tried to put on her mind instead of my own. I tried to look at it as she would.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize what I was doing. I was actually doing the John Loftus outsider test of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But all I was really trying to do is look at it like she would, so I could explain it in a way that would get through her barriers or her defenses or her biases is the way I would have thought of it, right?
Right.
Little did I know. Yeah.
Yeah. You walk a mile in her shoes and you fall in love with her shoes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened. The very first debate I watched like that, I thought, well, this is an anomaly. Dawkins won.
Yeah.
How could that be?
I think this is fascinating. And maybe this is just confirmation bias, right? That's all we're really talking about. But while you were a Christian and you were, like you said, the blue pill or whatever, you're in that matrix and you're seeing the world through that lens, Christians were winning all these debates.
Absolutely.
Clearly they were winning. You put on some empathic glasses and try to get inside your runner friend's head, and all of a sudden the atheists start winning.
Exactly.
Is it Yanni or is it Laurel?
and that is just such a funny thing, because my first thought was, oh, this is an anomaly. I'll watch another one instead.
Yeah.
Well, you can guess how that went. All of a sudden the Christians weren't winning.
All right. So I guess my point is that there's no underestimating the power of paradigm. The power of the lens through which you see things. I mean, look at us now. Like, I have friends that I respect and that I probably share a lot of ideologies, with. And yet, when they look at Trump, they see one thing, and I see the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Or I've been in circumstances where, just basically two people are looking at the same thing and seeing something totally different. And it is part of what divides us, as a species or as a people, is, what are you talking about? Like you said, Yanni and Laurel, or is the dress blue or gold?
Yeah.
And here we find ourselves. And somehow we've got to acknowledge that it's okay. I think that's what you're doing, Alan, is you're saying, hey, I've got Christian friends that I don't think any less of, because if not for this trifecta, there go I.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Because one other thing that happened as part of this trifecta is that I had a couple more conversations with her, and she said, "Oh, I've got a video that I think you would enjoy because you love science," and she dropped off Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos video series on my desk.
Oh boy,
yeah.
Great stuff.
Oh, boy. Yeah, don't you know it? I had no idea what was coming my way. So this is the hammer, right? So I took it home one evening, and I popped it into my computer, and it started playing. And it wasn't more than 10 or 15 minutes into it. I mean, I thought I was going in for a good science show, right?
Yeah.
And what I was hearing was a debunking of intelligent design. And I was furious. I started furiously writing an email to myself of reminders of all the points that I was going to rebut about this video. And I walked into work the next morning, and I was already in fight or flight mode. I decided what I was going to do one of two things. I was either going to drop the video series on her desk, perhaps with an explanation of why this was horrible, or I was going to fight. The first option would have been the flight mode, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was going to go and study the apologetics and listen to more of that series and build up a real case against it.
Yeah.
Well, had I chosen flight, I probably never would have deconverted.
Yeah.
So that was the third leg of the trifecta. I could have very easily stopped right there and remained Christian.
Which I think a lot of people do. I mean, it's kind of to bury the head in the sand. It's like, okay, I've watched a few episodes of this Cosmos stuff. It's really fucking with me, and I'm gonna give it back to her and say, thank you, but no thank you, and stay in your zone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. But by the time I hit the end of the series, and by the time I was done listening to all the various apologetics debates I could find, I was at least to the point where I was no longer a Bible inerrantist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where it starts. Yeah.
And that gets us to September 10th, 2015. And I have one more chance. This runner friend scheduled a run with me up Mount Ascutney in Vermont because I love hills. Mm-hmm. And no one else wanted to do that, you know.
Yeah.
I can't imagine why. I mean, what's wrong with them, right?
Yeah, really. Hills. That's what you need.
And I was still pretty much thinking I was believing at that point. And we embark on this run, and I figure out I'm going to work on 3 aspects of why I believe and why I think she should believe. And you know what ended up happening is, this is kind of street epistemology, by the way, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
You get people to ask questions of themselves or describe their beliefs, and it can fall apart.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for me. I went for these 3 facts that I thought were absolutely convincing. And because of some of those seeds of doubt that were already in my mind, they just fell apart while I tried to explain them. I literally started that run ready to convince her, and I ended that run saying, "Oh my God, I don't know." Right? I mean, that's your Hank Green video, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's right. Alan, you know, you're a learned guy. I mean, I don't remember what you do. You're like not a chemist.
Computer.
What's your line of work again?
I work in computational geometry, and yeah, you might
why wouldn't I remember that? Computational geometry.
Easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're learned. You've been to school. You've got, you know, degrees. You're working in a theoretical thing, you know, and yet, you know, you up until 2015, you're still involved in church, and it's just it strikes me. How'd you reconcile that? I guess you have to kind of cordon off your brain or something.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Bob. You know, in fact, I've thought about that a lot since, because there are an incredible number of very smart people in the church. And I do believe there are ways that the church behaves that makes it equally easy for an intelligent person as for somebody who's less so. I mean,
really?
You guys know the Matrix. I don't know. Do you ever remember the quote from Morpheus to Neo in the Matrix, where he basically says, and I have it here on my computer, so I'm going to quote it to you.
Yeah.
But he says, "The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it." And I do believe that religion is a mind hack. I mean, it gets in there when we're the most vulnerable, either at the beginning of our lives when we're in childish dependence, and it tells us this is, you know, science tells us how to think, but religion usually tells us what to think.
Yeah.
Right.
Mind hack. Well, it's, like you said, there's 2 things: when you're young, or when you hit a wall, like you're either in prison or you're in a 12-step program, and that's where you find Jesus.
Yeah,
you're vulnerable, right? I mean, when I came back to religion, I was vulnerable too. My wife and I, my new wife, we had gone over to England. We had gone over there as complete hedonists. We were just going to have fun, right? And 18 months into that, we're looking at each other saying, "Oh, where's the purpose and meaning of this? There's got to be more to life." And that made us vulnerable. I do believe that's why we came back into the system.
Okay.
We were looking for purpose and meaning, and we weren't looking in the right places. And moreover, the internet wasn't around at that time. I mean, we were talking late 80s at this point.
Sure.
There was no internet. We were, you know, you couldn't just walk into an internet cafe and look up Sartre or some other deep thinking, you know.
Yeah.
So pretty much on your own, and we weren't finding it. Well, we get back to the States and we find a charismatic church, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's something here.
Yeah.
You know, several mind hacks make it hard to believe. First of all, once you get in, once you're indoctrinated, you then begin to learn that anything that teaches differently than this is the devil's work. I mean, I've literally had people when I say I'm reading Dawkins or Dennett or anything like that, they'll say that's by the devil.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, for
Well,
sure.
what the hell does that even mean? The devil, the demon, the ghost, what the hell you talking about? I mean, there are no such things, but not really, huh?
Oh, yeah, you believe it.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I guess.
really, it's the ultimate in-group, out-group experience because anything outside of our tribe is controlled by something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, but Bob and I were talking on the porch how illogical heaven and hell are, as far as re-manifesting on the other side as yourself. And will you have a physical body? And what age will you be? And, how long will your cock be?
Do you care about such things?
I just had to throw that in there.
That's okay.
But anyway, Bob is like, this just makes no sense. And I was just reminded, I mean, it's been 10 years for me pretty much since I believed all this stuff. But, you just, faith. It's faith. You literally say, I do not know how God's going to do it, but he said he's going to do it, and therefore he will because he never breaks a promise. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have to understand it. It's beyond my understanding. And so, there's just this faith thing. So whenever something comes along that contradicts God's word, you have to say, la, 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 ignore that. And,
you're told to, yeah.
Yeah, and you can say it's because it's of the devil, but it's just not God. And so we have to stick with God. God said it. I believe it because he said it, and I know, and I know.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah. Are you going to write that in the music sometime?
Well, that's a Russ Taff song.
Oh, okay.
Really?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I should know that.
So it's just you double down. You just double down.
You keep doubling down.
Yeah, you keep it up.
And I got to say, again, this is where I say I respect my Christian friends. There's no shame in that. You are completely told that is how to think.
Oh, yeah. There's actually a lot of pride in that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the Bible says so. There's this talk about fleeing worldly conversations. And, the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's eyes and all of that stuff. You tell yourself that every Sunday, and people tell you that from the pulpit. And I'll tell you believe it. You select your sources then. So I could select my source from Michael Behe, who is an intelligent designer. Mm-hmm. And if I want to believe in old earth creationism, then I'll listen to him and no one else. So I won't listen to the evolutionary argument. I'll listen to the intelligent design argument. And in so doing, I can pick up a lot of scholarly information, but it's twisted through this lens.
Yeah, and I struggle sometimes because I sometimes feel conviction that I'm doing the same thing.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we should be open-minded to critiques, and we should be willing to revise our beliefs. I mean, I worry too that anybody on any side of the religious divide is prone to following their own cognitive biases.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And we create our own, echo chambers.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that I will push back, though, when it comes to, like you just said, on either side of the religious divide, they both can be guilty of selective listening or whatever. And I want to call bullshit on some of that because
go for it.
I've already been on your side. I'm on the Christian side. I've been there, done that. I believed it, probably knew it better than you.
Yeah, you did.
So you can't accuse me of being ignorant or selective about the other perspective because I believed it and I've been there.
You're right, and
they have not been to my side.
Right.
Oh, right. Right, that's true.
That's one of the tough conversations that I've had many times with Christians too, is this idea that, well, you are just reading what you want to read and believing what you want to believe. And I want to say, don't you get it? For 3 months of my life in 2015, I studied voraciously and I was angry. I was angry as hell at all these atheists. And I wanted to disbelieve them and I couldn't.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about your current wife is now a non-believer?
No, she is a believer.
Okay, let's talk about that. How does she feel about your deconversion?
Well, this led to a lot of very difficult times. So in the fall of 2015, I got to say I was at least very good about telling her when I first was no longer a biblical inerrantist.
Yeah.
And the date that I finally stopped believing in Bible inerrancy was September 10th of 15. A week later, or less than a week later, my wife and I were heading to Nova Scotia. By the way, on a bike trip. Mm-hmm. We were going 2 bikes, Nova Scotia. We were in this little town of Stewiacke, Nova Scotia, going to see the tidal bore. So this is a river that flows both ways, and it's phenomenal. And here we are. We're in a B&B. We go out to supper one night, and she says something to me, and I have no idea what she said. But my response must have been my jaw dropped, and I said, I don't believe it's inerrant. So I'm not sure what she said, but it was something, about, well, the Bible says this, or it was the sort of conversation we would have ordinarily had at any time, right?
Right.
And my jaw dropped, and I mumbled something, and her jaw probably dropped. I can't remember specifically, but we went back to our B&B, and we were settling into bed, and about 11:30, she said to me, "What do you mean you don't believe in the inerrancy?" Mm-hmm. And we had a long conversation, and that was about it at that time. But it kept coming up the rest of that fall. And meanwhile, I was beginning to unpack more and more and more, and I was believing less and less. So along the way, we started having some so I would start to tell her why Genesis 1 through 11 couldn't be trusted, for example. And I'd start to tell her about, the problems with the creation story. And, I would use words like myth, and those are trigger words. Let's face it. With somebody who believes that, you don't say that. And again, I don't blame her. This would have triggered me, right?
Right.
And conversations started to get more and more pointed. The following spring, I said, I've got to leave the worship team at church because I'm not even a believer anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, funny thing, I guess it took an entire 12 months, come to think of it, because May of 2015, I was a firm believer, and I just was starting to walk into this thing with my eyes closed. May of 2016, I no longer believed, and I left the worship team. Mm-hmm. But in between there, and I think the important part is what was going on with my wife and me. We were having some really hot conversations, and so what really wasn't working, by the way, is trying to tell somebody that you love that their belief system is absolutely wrong. I mean, number one, their belief system tells them to ignore you. So everything inside her would naturally be screaming, he's seditious. He's trying to hurt me.
In going back, there's some debates between my wife and I as far as how much pressure I put on her to deconvert. How about you guys?
Oh, it was the same thing. I think my biggest mistake is once I learned all the things that I was learning and I had studied the various science, I wanted my wife to know this too. I was kind of excited about it, and yet I knew it was going to be a big hurdle for her. So I really wanted to deconvert her. And that, of course, showed through. And so now I'm not only a threat because of what I'm believing, but I'm an existential threat to her faith on purpose. And she very much sensed that. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, for anybody who's living across that faith divide, do not do that.
Yeah, bad idea. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I just have a if you're an educated person and you stop and you think inerrancy and you say, well, it was written thousands of years ago in Aramaic and in Greek and in Hebrew and loads of copies. We don't have one singular copy anymore. It's copy after copy after copy, written before the Enlightenment, written before germ theory, written before also, you know what I mean? I mean, it just doesn't, how the hell does it be inerrant? I mean, it's not right.
You need for it to be inerrant.
But not only that, but the dogma says so. So, the thing that holds this system together, and I do believe it's still possible with all intellectual integrity, it's completely possible to continue believing. And that's where I believe. I got a really intelligent friend who is a scientist and an apologist, and he works for IBRI, Institute for Bible Research something or other. And he is that. He's inerrantist. So you say, for example, the the premise is that God inspired these words, therefore they have to be correct. So in other words, he even would have inspired any errors or any mutations in the copying. And of course that sounds like bullshit on the other side, but it's a proposition that holds together, if you will, if you want to look at it that way.
Really?
All right, this is where we get into being accused as atheists, that we just think that theists are stupid, that we feel superior, that we're the intellectuals, et cetera, Yeah. And that's what they would like to say to us. And I always say, it's kind of partially true, because I do think you'd have to be stupid to do that. But I know you're saying, Alan, that you've got a friend, he's remained an inerrantist, but I think what Bob is saying is valid. It's just like what he has to do to his own brain, the compartmentalization, in order to stay true to an idea that is completely illogical. It's tough. And I think part of us ex-Christians, the elation that we feel is that, at last, we our minds are free. Like it's like maybe a tiger that's been in a zoo all its life, and you set it back out in the jungle.
Yeah. You know what? I once I wrote on Life After God once, the public page. I wrote a little bit about how coming from Christianity to atheism was like coming from a closed-in room with nothing but fluorescent lights out into the glorious sunshine of what's out there. It's like you've been locked up all your life, and all of a sudden you realize you couldn't. There are certain thoughts you could not entertain. You were not allowed to entertain, and suddenly you take those. You open those doors. It's like, holy,
shit.
What? Yeah, holy shit! Look what's out here. Yeah,
totally. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the trifecta was the runner, the trans woman, and just your attempt to go into apologetics.
And the Cosmos series, which really
the
kicked me in the ass. Yeah.
All right, so your wife to this day remains a Christian. I guess she wouldn't be like a fundy, though, right?
Well, I think so.
Oh my!
And here's where I'm very excited. This is one of the purposes I wanted to talk about with you guys today, is that you can actually make it work.
Okay.
Yes. So we migrated from the tough confrontational talks of late 2015, early 2016, where I was trying to deconvert her. She called me on it, and I said, yes, that's what I'm doing. And she said, well, I'm not going to talk to you about anything about this at all if that's your purpose. And I realized I was in the wrong there. It's not my job to hack her mind either. In the same way we say religion is immoral by hacking minds. Well, I would be immoral if I was to hack hers.
Yeah, and you rob her agency, and it's a disrespectful thing. And I think that's what my wife was feeling. Just like, back off, dude. I'll do this on my own, and if and when I do it, it'll be on my terms.
So, Alan, is it because of heaven and hell? Is that why the fear of death, the think I got to see my mom again, those kind of things? Is that why maybe your wife is still? Well,
I think they enter into it a little bit, but really we were so, and I'm not sure how I can get this across really well. But the system itself is so close. So remember the Matrix analogy again?
Yeah.
But when Morpheus is saying, these people are in the system. This system is all they know. Religion, Christianity for one, but all of the religions of the world provide such a seamless covering over for your mind to go. If you want to know what's the mystery of evil, why do some people go to hell? If you want to know why does the world seem to be old if the book says it's not, they've got answers for all of that. Because if they didn't, let's face it, I believe religions evolve too. And they evolve in the ecosystem that they're ensconced in. And as soon as new information or data becomes available, there's this tendency of the ecclesiastical elite to fight it, or when they can't fight it anymore, they'll incorporate it. So, for example, the Catholic Church has embraced evolution.
Yeah.
And what you'll see is religions themselves will evolve further and further. So basically, think of this as a sphere that surrounds someone's brain. If you have a hole there, they're going to get out, right? So it's all about keeping those holes plugged, keeping the defensive mechanisms up, and either whatever's outside is incorrect and will provide counter evidence for it, or will provide a counter worldview for it, or when that all fails, we'll embrace it. And so nobody inside, I have to say again, my opinion is that nobody inside can be blamed for believing what is such a well-made illusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't that so? And it's never Occam's razor. It's never, that doesn't make any sense. The easiest way is this way. But no, we can't go that way because then we'd be blaspheming or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody's doing it disingenuously, or maybe at least very few are being disingenuous. It's the real it's a real deal. But anyway, so the confrontation didn't work. And what we moved to from that, which also, by the way, spoiler alert, it didn't work either, was we decided to make anything religious a taboo subject. We just wouldn't talk about it. So our relationship started to repair quite a bit, but there was this disingenuous aspect to it. So there was parts of me that I wasn't telling her about. So in between the combative time and the taboo time, I started the Rex Jamesson identity. And I told her about it. At one point, she looked at it, and she didn't like it, so she stopped looking at it. But at one point during this taboo period, she opened up Rex Jamesson, and she was floored because I was writing some snarky things about Christianity. And what ended up happening is when you make something a taboo, you have these sort of episodes of rancor and anger, and it just does not work because I'm hiding part of my identity from her. So, and what I realized, she really, again, she's wonderful because she called me to task on some things that were really personally offensive. And I realized there are some Facebook memes out there that probably are not worth repeating. Now, I know that's a shock, right?
Yeah. Most of them. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So it was really great. So I said, man, you're giving me a lot of good advice. You should look at Rex Jamesson more often. And she didn't. I mean, she realized, I really toned down my rhetoric because I wasn't trying to, again, like the Matrix example, the system is our enemy, not the people who are in it. And I don't even want to say it's our enemy, but if we believe that religion is an illusion, a delusion, if you will, then yeah, you can call it our enemy. I guess I would call myself anti-theist in that way. I hope there are fewer people that are caught in it later on down the road, but I also respect a lot of the people who are in it now.
Yeah, but it's a human matrix, though. You know what I mean? It's a matrix made up of people that keep it going. It's not just like a machine. Well, I mean, in many ways it is, I guess. But you know what I mean? It's we make it move.
Yeah. Well, it's an evolving memeplex. Have you ever heard that term before?
Sure. Memeplex. Yeah. Dawkins' idea of meme. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's basically this collection of memes. And, let's face it, if a denomination is missing a meme that's important for its survival, it'll die off. I've often heard talks about fundamentalist Christianity growing while mainstream Christianity is dropping off. Right?
Yeah.
Even some of the fundamentalists, apologists will admit that they think the reason that is because mainstream Christianity is de-emphasizing heaven and hell, while fundamentalist Christianity is emphasizing it. So what's happening is these memes cause people to stick very closely to the core. If you don't have those memes, people are free to migrate in and out, or they're going to be less evangelical. They're going to be less prone to try to make converts.
Yes, that's something. Yeah, I think you're right. So that's doubling down is what happens.
Yeah, and it's the memeplex. It's the system. Hey, here's another movie example, and you can edit as much out as you want.
Not a problem.
Did you watch Inception?
Yeah.
Love that movie.
Great movie.
So do you remember the pivotal scene? The thing that it all hinges on is this one scene where he's invited to their apartment, and he goes in, and it's a shambles, and he steps on a broken wine glass, and the window's open, the drapes are flowing inward, and he goes to the window to where there's a little ledge outside, and across the street from him is his wife sitting there, dangling her foot over the edge, sitting on the ledge on the other side.
Yeah.
You know what happened there is that the wife was fully convinced that this was a dream state. This wasn't reality. This is one of the levels. And she was fully convinced that if they killed themselves, they'd come back to a reality, the real reality. Whereas he knew that where they were at was reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you remember his reaction, his shock, his horror, the way he begged, pleaded, cajoled her to not jump. And I'm going to actually twist this around. You guys are probably thinking, we're the guys who are the realists, and we're sitting on that side begging the other. Actually, to the Christian, it feels the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at us. Our spouse is looking at us saying, "Oh my God, you're going to die. You're going to be lost forever." And I know. I mean, this is the thing. Again, go back to that Hank Green video. I think a lot of people in the church, they are told from day one, you know that you're right. Mm-hmm. It's the only truth. It's the only way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're the people sitting at the window or yelling across, "Don't do it, don't jump." And that leads to a lot of angst. Anyway, I think that's why the Christian message and the fundamentalist message is so compelling. Even no matter how much education you have, you stick with it.
Mm. It is a mystery, and how addictive almost it is. It's an opiate. I mean, we've said that before, but it is something that is hard to get out of. And even some of us now look back and are kind of. I think that's what I'm hearing in your voice, Alan, is that you're kind of amazed, by the skin of your teeth you got out, and really, in some ways, you probably. I mean, all of us that got out obviously got out for a reason, but we couldn't have foreseen that reason. We may not have even been able to concoct that reason. I mean, it just we just happened to there happened to be a loophole, in the matrix, or there happened to be, like you said, around that sphere around your head. If there's a hole in it, it's gonna,
there's a hole somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the doctrine tries to plug up those holes. The apologists try to plug up those holes. And for the most part, they work completely well. And once in a while, there's a set of evidence that creeps through to the individual that's going to get them out.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, so anyway, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt if you guys are going somewhere else, but I want to go to what does work, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all this to say, thinking about the Matrix, thinking about the Inception, we had a lot of, even after we had made religion taboo, my wife actually to this day apologizes to me because she says, I've been so hard on you. So I eased off, and there were still times of conflict like we've never seen before. And my wife and I have never really been on the opposite sides of a major issue, and nothing so major as, believing that I'm eternally damned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it led to a lot of tough confrontations. And as I say, she apologized multiple times lately that, boy, she was really hard on me. But again, from that model of, you still think I'm dying forever, I don't blame you for being that full of grief and agony over me. But here's what does work. We started to decide we're going to be open about things. If I was reading on my Kindle, if I was reading a biology book, or I was reading a deconversion book, I would hide that from her. And I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. We're going to be as open as possible. If you don't want to look at my Kindle, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you the reasons that I'm believing how I do, because that's not really healthy either. But I'm there. I'm present for you. The big thing is, we started to realize we had to respect each other, and to a very deep level. I mean, not just this kind of fuzzy, foofy, oh yeah, I respect you, but I mean, even respecting each other to the level of saying, I respect how you got to your current beliefs. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do because we disagree, but I'm going to respect the fact, and I do, that she came about her beliefs honestly, and that if she goes to the end of her life believing this, that's fine with me. Yeah. And she's working at doing the same thing for me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's whenever, I had a friend one time, and he was basically a drug addict, and at one point I called him out on something, and he just said, I'm fighting an honest battle here. And that's what made me think of it, is the way you just said that. She got to her beliefs honestly. And even though I literally wrote back, well, I don't think I did write back to him, but in my head I said, bullshit. You're not fighting an honest battle. Mm-hmm. You're completely led around like a ring through your nose by these drugs, and you're lying to yourself, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's clearly my perspective, and it's a right one, but so is his. And my respect for him is my respect for him to be wrong. I mean, to not take away his freedom to be a free moral agent and think for himself and decide for himself, regardless of what I think. I'm not the authority on truth.
Yeah.
And especially his truth.
Yeah. And I literally think absolutely nothing less of my wife because she holds these beliefs. Because I've been there, escaped through the skin of my teeth, is completely not only honest, but as I say, I honestly believe you can have intellectual integrity and stay there.
You have a very mature relationship with your wife. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's good.
My God, do we? Oh, it's so cool.
But this is enough, and we know this because we've had these folks on the show. This is enough to break up a marriage. This is enough to make sure that you'll never see your children again. I mean, honest to God, that's the kind of stuff that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She is an amazing person. And Cass, you and I have talked before about how something very novel would be to have the two of us on the show together because she is eloquent and passionate about what she's going through.
Yeah.
And I think for the many people who have saved spouses, who have religious spouses, it would be great for all of us to be able to hear that side of the story.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
One more thing I just wanted to say is that I ended up a couple weeks ago coming up with this maxim that I think really encapsulates this hairline edge we still ride on. And that is when you have somebody you love with a different position like that, in your conversations, to whatever extent possible, without doing harm to yourself, you engage your partner on her terms. But in living your life, to whatever extent possible without doing harm to your loved one, you live it on your terms. So you get the difference. You engage her on her terms, unless doing so is being disingenuous. Yeah. But you live on your terms unless doing so does her harm. And I can give you an example of that. So what I was doing was, like I say, I was hiding my Kindle whenever I had anything irreligious or anti-religious on it. And also, by the way, my wife and I still tithe. We still give 10%. And I've said, you give 5% to wherever you want, and I'll give 5% to wherever I want.
I see. Yeah, good.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And so I have been giving my 5% to humanist causes. And but what I really wanted to do as well is to support things that are really exploring non-belief as well. So I'd like to give to Richard Dawkins. I'd like to give to podcasts such as this one, for example. I really want to start supporting that sort of thing, but I felt tied up because what's she going to think? So, the way to live that maxim without doing, to whatever extent possible, live on your terms. I had a conversation with her once, and I said, you know what? I need to give some of my 5% to things that I know you won't like. So how about and she does the checkbook, she does the accounting. And I said, how about if we do this in some way that's invisible to you? You'll know what I'm doing, but you don't have to know the details. You don't have to see that I'm giving to Foundation Beyond Belief or something like that. Pick your poison, but and so believe it or not, she's fine with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got to wrap it up, Alan. I noticed in your bio that you are a swing dancer.
Yes. It's one of the many things my wife and I love to do together.
I think that's really healthy. I mean, there's a lot about your marriage that is healthy, but that I think is in a sense, that's what you're doing. You're theologically dancing with her.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. And dancing is a conversation.
Sure.
Swing dance is called lead and follow, but the follower can take over at times. In fact, advanced dancing, the two of them really pretty much have this conversation.
Yeah.
And he'll say, let's go this way. And she'll say, no, how about this way?
Right. Yeah.
And you go there together.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I wanted to mention really briefly, too, that she had a couple of things that she was hoping that I would say on her behalf that I think are so important.
Okay.
And of course, I've already told you about how unbelievable mature I think she is and how she handles things. You guys have noticed that. Mm-hmm. But she also goes through this incredible existential angst about what's going to happen to me. She said one thing that she wishes is that there was a support group for Christian spouses of people who have deconverted.
Yeah.
And she wishes there was a book or a Facebook page for that. There really should be.
Yeah.
So if there's anybody listening here who would love to help her, or who has a spouse who would love to help her, I think she'd be very interested in that.
Yeah. Well, we have a few that the wife has remained at least somewhat religious or spiritual or even devout, and like Bob Barnes is a faithful listener of the show, and his wife is not necessarily fundamentalist or anything, but she goes to church every Sunday, mostly to take her mother. But she's not ready to call herself an atheist. Heck, my wife doesn't call herself an atheist, you know. So I don't know. I hear you. I definitely hear you that there's a need for that, because what we're talking about in every case is loneliness. And that's why this show became an appeal to a lot of people, is that before they started listening to it, they felt alone. And so it met that need. Well, here your wife is saying, I kind of feel alone too, and I wish there was a community for me.
Yeah. And for her, it's especially hard around the holidays, because she wants to read the Christmas story, but she feels like for me and the kids, it's just like talking Santa Claus. You know, it's a fable.
What age are your kids?
They are 24 and soon to be 26.
Okay. You're not going to be reading any Christmas stories to them.
Yeah, no, but my mother-in-law does that too. She wants to read Luke. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy.
I see.
That one. Yeah, I get that. And if you look at it not as a true story, but as I don't know, it's a metaphor or whatever of us being reborn, or I don't know.
A metaphor, a good story. You got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
actually, we had that conversation just last night, and I said, "Boy, I would encourage you to continue to do so. Go ahead, tell that story. There's no reason not to. There's no reason we can't hear it. It's not like we're afraid of it or
there you go. Yeah, we got nothing to fear.
Yeah.
Who's it hurting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, and from the Bible believer's perspective, you remember, Cass, the verse that says the Bible is a powerful two-edged sword, and it's going to work. There's something that says it will work its own ends. So, if she believes that, let's give the Christians a chance to use it. That's fine. You know?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say give them enough rope to hang themselves, because there is a degree in which, like yourself, the more a person reads the Bible, the more likely they are to become an atheist. I mean, in some ways, because
if you really read it, really study it,
it's its own
quite a
self-sabotaging book. All right. Well, we are. I'm frustrated with these technical difficulties, and I hope that I can salvage it on the post
so too. It's been a great conversation. And by the way, my libation of choice.
There you go.
Yes. Tell us.
Well, my wife and I started drinking cheap wines long ago, and sort of like the Merlots and stuff were horrible, but we didn't know it.
Yeah.
We found this local winery called Seven Oaks, and they sell a Pinot Noir that is absolutely to die for. And so we both drink that together, and I drink IPAs, any IPA I can find. The hoppier, the better.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Not me. Bob, you like hops, don't you?
I'm a more malty guy. I like porters and stuff, but that's just me.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, I think you're a fascinating person, and I think one of the things that stands out for me is how much you are a details guy. Like you remembered a lot of details about stuff that happened 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, important. Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you guys, bringing some of these memories back. Part of my purpose, I think, at this point is to really be able to be a friend to people who are undergoing this transition, or maybe marriage undergoing the transition.
Yeah.
So glad to be on it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Alan. Thanks, man.
How do you do?
Alan.
Alan from New Hampshire. New Hampshire? Yeah. Can't get there from here.
Computational geometrist.
Amazing.
It has to do with GPS, I think.
Does it?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a GPS company.
I mean, it's a real. That's heavy stuff. You know.
He's when I was talking about the details, he's got dates, and it's just like this a little thing that it just comes natural for him.
Yeah.
And yet I'm horrible at remembering details. I mean, I just wipe my hard drive clean just about the next day. You know.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at that. So anyway, those are some things.
He was very good. He's a very bright guy, and what a very mature fella and a very mature relationship with his wife.
Yeah, which it's hard earned. I think they they figured out this is not working for us to just fight.
Yeah,
and it's disrespectful.
Yeah. And I mean, he'll say, "Yeah, she really took me to task, and I really appreciate that." You know,
right?
That's great.
And one of, I guess, of all of our guests, maybe one of the most generous perspectives of Christians.
Yeah, very generous.
He's like, no disrespect.
No, they're trapped. They're caught. They're in the matrix. And, what are you going to do? You know, you're going to be mean.
Pretty, it's obviously I love. No illusions, and the
angry atheists.
Just the firebrands, but I also love this perspective too, and I think that's the point, right? They're both valid.
Yeah,
that's what we're saying. I mean, that's what he's saying about his wife. Her perspective is valid. Now, I will say I have a problem. Historically, I've had a problem. I'm getting more and more accustomed to it, or maybe even like, I'm starting to understand what they mean by it, and that is when the phrase "your truth" or "my truth," because I was kind of an absolutist when it came to truth. It's black and white. It's either true or it's false. So you can't just say, "Well, my truth." And the example that I gave is we have a friend. You and I have a mutual friend. I won't say his name, but he has a daughter who's schizophrenic. She thinks she's pregnant with triplets constantly, and she's not. And that would be her truth, right? Because I guarantee in her mind she's convinced of it. Or maybe she's not. I don't know. But here again, it's you don't get to just say something and expect the rest of us to also buy into it.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly believe whatever you want to believe, that the earth is flat and all that stuff. If that's what you want to, if that's your truth, well, okay, but that's not my...
It's not my truth.
I don't want to, I don't want you in charge of the country. I don't want you, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I mean, if everybody has truth, then what the hell is truth? You know what I mean? So there has to be some method to use that gets us to truth, or as close as we can get to truth, and science is usually the way.
Yeah,
and if we just embrace that, I think we'd be much
for the concrete things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here with faith and beliefs and religion.
Oh, hello! You have a little
a little notification. These are nuanced gray areas, and I think that's where this term "my truth" has a little bit of traction. Is that okay? Yeah, we're talking about stuff for which there is no proof. And so you can kind of play around with it. I don't know if it's relativism, but it's...
I guess it is, yeah.
It's loosey-goosey. But I think at the end of the day, what I'm saying is people are more important than things. People are more important than ideas or beliefs. And that I highly value freedom. One of the worst things you could ever take away from me is my freedom. I want to do unto others. And by telling you what you believe is stupid, I feel like I'm robbing them of their freedom. Okay.
Well, I'm still going to the doctor. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go to a Christian Scientist. I'm just not.
No,
I'm just not.
Because you don't believe in their truth.
Well, they're not going to heal me. They're not going to, I want to go to an anesthesiologist that really knows his shit. You know what I mean?
You're not into pixie dust?
No. And I think that's what we do. We really compartmentalize things. We cordon things off in our minds. So.
Yeah, we protect it from scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's called faith.
I suppose.
All right, man. Thanks for talking.
See you next week for the last one. Yay!
Hey.
Okay.
Boo.
Yeah, boo. See ya.
So that's our talk with Alan Witmer, and you can reach him at alanwitmer@gmail.com. That's Alan with just ALAN .Witmer, 1T, WITMER, @gmail.com. I'm especially moved by Alan's compassion for the spouses of deconverters. We in the deconversion movement have found great comfort and solace in the community of others. And sometimes our spouses who remain believers, they too need a community, and I don't know what to do about that, but I appreciate Alan's concern, and maybe you can reach out to him personally and work something out. It's, again, alan.whitmer@gmail.com. Also, this was the last interview that Bob and I will do together. We do have one more show in which he and I are going to do a special episode on the subject of death. There will also be a moment where you can share a few thoughts about your appreciation for Bob. If you would like to leave a message for Bob on an old traditional voicemail box, you can call 1-800-685-1797. That's 1-800-685-1797, and leave a message for Bob, just saying how much you're going to miss him or how you feel about him or anything that you want to say. That is going to shut off about June 15th or 16th, somewhere in there. I'm going to have to shut that down because I've got to edit it for that week's show as a part of that show. And at the end of next week's episode, I'm going to play back all your messages to Bob. Thanks for listening again, and we'll talk to you next week.